All right, if I want to solve this radical equation, well, is the radical all by itself? Well, yes, it is. So we are allowed to get rid of the radical because it's all by itself. Now, to get rid of a square root, you are going to square both sides. So that would be the first step. I'm going to square both sides. Now, this is going to make a mess. Watch why. When you square the square root of x minus 2, that's not a mess. But when I square this, I'm going to have to box or FOIL, because what I now have is x minus 4 times x minus 4. And that uses the box or FOIL method to find its value. I'm going to FOIL, and so I'm left with x minus 2 still over here. And on the right, when I FOIL, I'm skipping steps, but with you can do your box or FOIL. This is what you should end up with when you use your box or FOIL. So now we have a quadratic. Now quadratics make this harder to solve. If I have a quadratic, you want to make your quadratic equal to 0. That's how you solve quadratics. It goes back to math 2. So to solve a quadratic, I have to move all this over to make it equal to 0. So I can minus this x off, so I minus it from the x. And I can add the 2 off, which would add right there. So what I now have is 0 equals x squared. These would be a negative 9x, and these would be an 18. So that right there, I now have to be able to know how to solve this. And guess what? You have to use factoring or quadratic formula. And these will be, this one can factor. So, how do you solve this? You need to factor it. And the factoring method I like to use is this like big X thing. And what I do is I take the 18 and I put it on top, and I take the negative 9 and I put it on bottom. Many of you have seen this before. And what this big X thing is about is I'm trying to find the factors that multiply to get 18. I said multiply to get 18. And that add to get negative 9. I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to get 18 and add to get negative 9. And those will be the factors that created this. And hopefully you can see that that would be negative 6 and negative 3. Those are the factors that make the multiply at the top, add at the bottom. And so I write those factors as x minus 6 and x minus 3. What that's saying is this right here, if you FOIL this back together or box this, you'll go back to this. We're turning this standard form into its factored form by using this little mechanism. Now this is easy to solve. So I am now going to have to figure out how to solve this. In order to solve this, do you guys know when we have two things multiplied that equal 0, don't one of these have to be 0? If you have two things that multiply to get 0, one of them has to be 0. So if one of them has to be 0, that means that either x minus 6 has to equal 0, or x minus 3 would have to equal 0. And then some of you can figure that out by just looking at it, but I'm going to solve them. Again, some of you could just look and see what it is. Can you tell that's 6? When it's 6, make that 0. And this, when I add 3 over, won't that be 3? So what it's saying is, if I put 6 right here, that'd create 0, and 0 times whatever this is 0. If I take 3 and put it there, that'd be 0. Multiply this, it'd be 0. So these are my two answers, because in factored form leads to it. Now, some of you are really good at this. Do you know that it's always the opposite of these are your zeros? Yeah. Yeah. It's always the opposite, these, usually with this kind of factoring. So that's like also a shortcut. But here's the problem with this question. Some of you stop and think you're done. No, one or both of these, or none of them, could be no solutions. So we have to check both because they could not work. It's so essential to check, and watch what happens. One of them does malfunction. And here's how we check. We go and we stick it into the original function. And I'm going to stick 6 into the original function. Okay? I went to the original function. When I stick 6 in, this gets the square root of 4 equaling, over here, 2. Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
Does the square root of 4, this is 2, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Check mark. We are good. So 6 is an answer. Let's check again. All right. The square root of what minus 2 equals something minus 4. This time I'm going to plug in 3. The other answer. So I'm checking both my answers here. This is my check over here. What do we get here? The 3 minus 2 is the square root of 1. Does that equal negative 1? Does the square root of 1 equal negative 1?
No.
No, it does not. I cross that off. That's no. This is a no. So I'm going to go down here and cross that answer out. That answer down there is called extraneous. Do you hear that word? Extraneous means an answer that should have worked doesn't. So my only answer is 6. 6 is the only number that works when I plug it back in. So you better check your work. Some of you won't, and you'll be sad, like, what did I miss? Oh, I forgot to see if it all works. Check your work. This is a very kind of long question.